The old skin must be shed before the new one can come. Joseph Campbell. This video reached you because you're ready to stop repeating the same cycles and finally see the truth. The old self is holding you prisoner. What if ending that false identity is the key to freedom you've been searching for your whole life? Stay tuned. Every person carries an old self, the version of us built on routines, expectations, and survival strategies. This old identity isn't evil, but it's outdated. Think of it like old software on your phone. It once helped you function, but now it slows you down, glitches constantly, and keeps you stuck in patterns that no longer serve you. The old you is the combination of habits you didn't consciously choose, stories you inherited from family, and fears carved into you by past failures. It is the echo of the person you needed to be to survive your past, not the person who can thrive in your present. The reason we talk about killing the old self is because small fixes rarely work. You can't just patch a crumbling foundation with a little paint. Many people try to improve their lives by making tiny adjustments, a new routine, a bit of positive self-talk, maybe even a new haircut. But the old identity sits underneath like a stubborn root. No matter what surface-level change you attempt, it keeps regrowing the same struggles. Real transformation requires something radical, the conscious decision to let the old identity die. Death here is symbolic, but the process feels real. It feels like losing an anchor you've carried for years, even if that anchor dragged you into the deep. For example, someone who's always identified as the anxious one will subconsciously recreate situations that keep anxiety alive because it feels familiar. Another person who grew up believing, "I'm not worthy," will unconsciously sabotage opportunities because stepping into confidence threatens the identity they've clung to. Killing the old self means cutting those roots so new growth can finally happen. The moment of death often comes disguised as crisis, a failed relationship, losing a job, a health scare, or hitting emotional rock bottom. These events shake the old identity until it cracks, leaving us no choice but to ask, if I'm not who I thought I was, then who am I? And that's the doorway. On the other side of that question is freedom, the space where the observer, your higher awareness, can finally take the wheel. Killing the old you isn't about becoming someone new out of thin air. It's about removing what isn't you, stripping away layers of conditioning, and allowing your real self to emerge. Like shedding a heavy coat in the summer, you don't lose anything vital. You only lose what weighs you down. And when that old identity falls away, you begin to see that the true you, the one beyond the cycles, beyond the masks, has been waiting underneath all along. If the old identity is the weight you carry, the mask is how you present that weight to the world. Every one of us wears masks. Some are subtle, the polite smile when we're exhausted, the confident posture when we feel uncertain. Others are more elaborate, pretending to be endlessly successful, playing the role of the strong one, or hiding pain behind humor. These masks aren't lies in the malicious sense, they're defenses. They protect us from judgment, rejection, and vulnerability. But here's the catch. The longer we wear them, the more we forget they're masks at all. The mask is what most people call the ego. It's the image you carefully construct to survive in society. It thrives on labels: I'm smart, I'm broken, I'm ambitious, I'm unlucky. Some labels sound positive, others sound limiting, but they all trap you in a performance. The mask doesn't want truth, it wants recognition, applause, validation. That's why living through the mask feels exhausting. You're always monitoring how others perceive you, always rehearsing lines, always on stage. Now contrast that with the hidden observer. This is the part of you that doesn't perform. It doesn't care about applause or criticism because it doesn't need validation to exist. You felt this observer before, in quiet moments when you suddenly notice your own thoughts, or when you catch yourself replaying a memory and realize you are the one watching the replay. The observer is the silent awareness behind the noise. It's not judging, not rushing, not proving, just witnessing. The tension between the mask and the observer creates an inner tug-of-war. The mask insists, "I am what people think of me." The observer whispers, "I am regardless." The mask is fragile, a single insult can shatter it. The observer, on the other hand, is unshakable because it exists before and beyond every story you tell yourself. Here's a simple example. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers. The mask immediately panics. Do they like me? Do I look okay? Am I enough? Meanwhile, the observer calmly notices the nerves, notices the thoughts, and stays centered. The difference isn't subtle, one is performance under pressure, the other is presence without fear. When you begin shifting from mask to observer, life transforms. You stop being a character in other people's stories and start being the author of your own. The mask may have helped you survive, but the observer is the one that will help you truly live. And once you see the difference clearly, you'll never confuse the performance for the truth again. Have you ever noticed how the same kinds of problems seem to show up in your life, just wearing different disguises? Maybe it's the same type of relationship that ends the same painful way, no matter who the partner is. Maybe it's money slipping through your fingers, no matter how much you earn. Or maybe it's waking up each January full of determination, only to watch your goals fizzle out by March. These aren't coincidences, they're cycles. Cycles of repetition are what happen when the old self keeps running the show. Imagine a record player with a scratch on the vinyl. No matter how long the song is, the needle always jumps back to the same spot. That's how the old identity works. It pulls you back into familiar situations because familiarity feels safe, even if it's painful. The anxious person keeps finding reasons to worry. The people pleaser keeps ending up in one-sided friendships. The victim mindset keeps attracting scenarios where they feel powerless. The cycle feeds itself. Why do we repeat? Because the subconscious loves predictability. If you grew up in chaos, you unconsciously recreate chaos as an adult, not because you enjoy it, but because it feels like home. If you've always been told you're not enough, you'll find ways to sabotage success, because too much success threatens the script you've lived by. Until you recognize the cycle, you'll keep walking in circles, thinking life is unfair, when in reality, you're replaying the same program. The key to breaking repetition is awareness. The moment you pause and say, wait, I've been here before, this looks different, but it feels the same, the cycle starts to lose power. For example, someone who always attracts unavailable partners might notice, this isn't about them, this is about me repeating a script where love equals chasing. Awareness is like lifting the record needle and realizing you don't have to keep playing the same loop. Breaking cycles doesn't mean life becomes instantly perfect. It means you stop being blind to the patterns that used to control you. The first time you break a cycle, it feels uncomfortable because you're stepping into the unknown. But on the other side of that discomfort is freedom, a freedom you've never experienced before because you've never let yourself out of the loop. The observer within you is the one who notices the pattern. The mask is too busy playing the role. But when the observer says, enough, I see what's happening here, the cycle starts to collapse. And once you break one cycle, it becomes easier to spot the others. That's when life stops repeating and starts evolving. If cycles of repetition are the loops we get stuck in, emotional attachments are the glue that holds us there. They're the invisible threads tying us to old identities, even when we swear we're ready to change. And the most surprising part, we're often more attached to our pain than to our joy. Think about it, how many people say they want peace, but constantly revisit old arguments in their head. How many claim they want love, but can't let go of the heartbreak that defined them years ago. Emotional attachments keep us hooked to the past because, on some level, those feelings became part of who we believe we are. For example, someone who went through betrayal might cling to anger as a shield. If I stay angry, I'll never get hurt like that again. Another person who suffered rejection may hold onto the belief, I'm unworthy, because that story, as painful as it is, feels safer than risking the unknown. In both cases, the attachment becomes a survival mechanism. If I hold onto this emotion, I stay protected. But in truth, it's the opposite. The attachment keeps the wound alive. The hardest part of letting go is the fear of emptiness. If you release the pain, who will you be without it? If you drop the role of the victim, what identity fills that space? It feels like stepping into a void, and the ego hates voids. That's why we cling, not because the past was good, but because it was familiar. Breaking emotional attachments isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about seeing them for what they are, experiences that shaped you, not definitions of who you are. You can honor the fact that you were hurt without letting the hurt dictate the rest of your life. You can acknowledge the fear without building your entire identity around it. One powerful practice is noticing your language. Do you say things like, I'm always unlucky, I'm the anxious one, I never. Those aren't just words, they're evidence of emotional attachment. Shifting your language to I feel anxious sometimes, or I've had painful experiences, but they don't define me, begins loosening the grip. The observer in you doesn't cling. It sees emotions rise and fall like waves. The moment you realize you can feel an emotion without marrying it, you're free. And when those old attachments finally loosen, the glue that held the cycles together begins to dissolve. That's when the old self starts losing its grip and the new life has room to emerge. One of the sneakiest tricks of the old self is the belief that it's in control. We like to think we can predict outcomes, manage every detail, and bend life to our will if we just try hard enough. But this is an illusion, and clinging to it is one of the main reasons we stay stuck in cycles of frustration. The ego thrives on control. It tells you, if I plan everything perfectly, no one can hurt me. If I anticipate every scenario, I'll never fail. If I manage how people see me, I'll never feel rejected. On the surface, this seems logical, but in reality, life keeps proving us wrong. Relationships end even when you thought you did everything right. Opportunities vanish no matter how carefully you prepared. People misunderstand you regardless of how carefully you explained yourself. The more you try to tighten your grip, the more life slips through your fingers. Here's the truth: control is exhausting because it's endless. There will always be something unexpected, a twist, a change, a disruption. And ironically, the more energy you put into controlling life, the more powerless you feel when things don't go your way. It's like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands. Now, this doesn't mean you give up responsibility. It means you shift from control to surrender. Surrender isn't weakness, it's choosing not to fight against the flow of life. Imagine a surfer. If they tried to control the ocean, they'd drown. Instead, they learn to ride the wave. That's surrender, aligning with the current instead of resisting it. One simple way to spot the illusion of control is to notice where you feel tension. Do you obsess over what people think? Do you replay conversations, wishing you had said something different? Do you avoid risks because you can't control the outcome? Each of these is a sign that the ego is gripping too tightly. The observer within you approaches life differently. It doesn't need control because it isn't invested in outcomes for validation. It watches events unfold without attaching to them. It knows, I can't control the storm, but I can choose how I move through it. That's real power, not controlling life, but controlling your response. When you release the illusion of control, you stop fighting reality. You allow space for surprises, growth, and possibilities the old self would have missed. And in that surrender, you find something the ego could never give you: peace. Inside every person lives a shadow, the parts of ourselves we'd rather hide. It holds the traits we deny, the emotions we suppress, and the impulses we judge as bad. Anger, jealousy, fear, pride, grief, all of these live in the shadow. Most of us spend years pretending these parts don't exist. We smile through sadness, we bury resentment under politeness, we hide insecurity behind achievement. But what we repress doesn't disappear, it waits, it leaks out, and it controls us in ways we don't realize. The old self is built on this hiding. It crafts an image that says, I'm fine, I'm strong, I'm good, while pushing the darker parts into the basement of the psyche. But the more you deny the shadow, the more power it has. Have you ever snapped at someone over something small, only to wonder later why you were so upset? That's the shadow surfacing. Or maybe you've judged others harshly for traits you secretly fear in yourself. That too is projection of the shadow. Integration begins when you stop running and start witnessing. The observer doesn't judge the shadow, it simply notices. For example, instead of saying, I shouldn't feel jealous, you say, I notice jealousy is present in me right now. That small shift changes everything. Suddenly, the emotion isn't shameful, it's just information. Anger might signal a boundary being crossed. Sadness might reveal a part of you longing for care. Fear might highlight where you need growth. Carl Jung famously said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The shadow is exactly that, unconscious patterns that keep writing the same story. But once the observer shines light on it, the shadow loses its grip. Integration doesn't mean indulging every dark impulse. It means owning that those impulses exist and choosing how to respond consciously. For instance, Instead of lashing out in anger, you can channel that energy into setting firm boundaries. Instead of hiding insecurity, you can acknowledge it and practice vulnerability. Each time you integrate, you reclaim a piece of your power. The old self fears the shadow because it threatens the polished mask. The observer embraces it because wholeness is impossible without it. When you integrate your shadow, you stop splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable. You become more real, more grounded, and paradoxically, more compassionate toward others, because you recognize that everyone carries a shadow too. Shadow integration is the bridge between the false self and the whole self, and once you walk across it, the cycle of hiding ends. You finally step into authenticity. If the old self thrives on noise, the observer awakens in silence. Most of us live surrounded by constant sound, endless notifications, conversations, background music, television, the inner chatter of our own restless minds. Noise becomes a shield. As long as we're distracted, we don't have to sit with ourselves. But silence strips away the mask, and that's why it feels uncomfortable at first. Think about the last time you sat alone without your phone, without music, without a task to complete. Did your mind race? Did you suddenly remember regrets, worries, or unfinished plans? That discomfort is the old self panicking because silence exposes what it's been covering up. The ego thrives in distraction, but silence invites the observer forward. Silence is not empty, it's full of clarity. When the noise fades, you begin to notice patterns you couldn't see before. You hear the subtle voice of intuition, the gentle nudges of awareness that get drowned out in daily busyness. For example, in silence you may realize that the relationship you've been forcing no longer serves you, or that the anxiety you feel isn't random, but tied to a pattern you can now break. Silence is like turning off static, so you can finally hear the music underneath. Practicing silence doesn't have to mean hours of meditation in a cave. It can be as simple as starting your morning with 5 minutes of stillness before touching your phone. It can mean eating one meal in quiet awareness, really tasting each bite. It can mean walking without earbuds, just listening to the world around you. These small practices reconnect you to the observer. The reason silence is so powerful is that it shifts you from reacting to responding. When you're surrounded by noise, you live on autopilot. Every beep, buzz, and thought pulls your attention. But when you create silence, you create space. And in that space, you can choose. You can pause before speaking, breathe before reacting, notice before acting. That pause is where transformation begins. The old self fears silence because it means losing control of the narrative it has been running. But the observer thrives in it because silence is its natural state. Awareness doesn't need noise, it simply exists. The more you embrace silence, the more you realize that peace was never outside of you. It was always inside, waiting for the noise to fade. One of the most subtle ways the old self keeps us trapped is through labels. These are the little titles we attach to ourselves. I'm shy, I'm anxious, I'm successful, I'm the black sheep, I'm broken, I'm the strong one. Some of these labels might sound empowering, while others are obviously limiting, but in the end, they all box you in. A label turns you into a role, and once you accept it, you unconsciously start living in a script that matches the role. Here's the problem: life is fluid, but labels are rigid. A child who was once called the quiet one might grow up believing they're not meant to speak up, even when they have something important to share. A teenager labeled the troublemaker may internalize it so deeply that they continue self-sabotaging in adulthood, even when their heart longs for peace. And even the seemingly positive labels can backfire. The smart one may crumble under the pressure of always needing to perform, while the strong one may hide their pain because they're afraid of letting others down. Labels feel comforting at first because they give the ego a sense of identity. They simplify the messy complexity of who we are into something we can easily explain. But the truth is, you are not a label. You are not a single story. You are a living, evolving awareness that can't be reduced to a category. Letting go of labels doesn't mean rejecting your past or denying your traits. It means refusing to let those words define the limits of who you can be. For example, instead of saying, "I'm an anxious person," you might say, "I sometimes experience anxiety." That small shift changes everything. It acknowledges the experience without fusing your identity to it. Similarly, instead of saying, "I'm a failure," you can say, "I failed at something, but that doesn't define me. The observer never uses labels. It doesn't say, I am broken or I am perfect. It simply says, I am. It sees experiences come and go without needing to tattoo them onto identity. When you begin to live from this perspective, the grip of labels starts to loosen and you step into freedom. Without labels, you're not stuck playing the same role in every scene of your life. You get to rewrite, reinvent, and expand. You stop living as a character others wrote for you and start living as your true self, limitless, fluid, and unboxed. At the heart of every spiritual awakening is a simple but life-changing realization. You are not your thoughts, your emotions, or even the roles you play. You are the awareness that notices them. This is the hidden observer, and unlike the old self, it is timeless. Think of it this way: your body has changed since childhood. Your opinions, fears, and desires have shifted over the years. Even your memories fade and reshape themselves. Yet there is one thing that has remained constant: the silent awareness behind it all. The same you who noticed your first day at school is the same you noticing this very moment. That continuity is not your personality, it's your observer. The observer lives outside of time because it isn't caught in the drama of past and future. The old self spends its energy replaying mistakes or anxiously predicting outcomes, but the observer only exists in the now. It's the calm presence that watches thoughts rise and fall like clouds across the sky. Clouds come and go, sometimes stormy, sometimes light, but the sky itself remains untouched. That's the observer, spacious, steady, eternal. When you begin to rest in this awareness, life feels different. Instead of drowning in every wave of emotion, you notice the wave, ride it, and let it pass. Instead of fusing with every thought, I'm not enough, I'll never succeed, you see the thought for what it is, just mental weather passing through. This doesn't mean you stop feeling or thinking. It means you stop confusing yourself with the feelings and thoughts. Here's an everyday example. Imagine sitting in traffic. The old self might spiral. Why is this happening? I'm wasting time. People are so inconsiderate. Stress builds, but the observer notices, there is frustration in me. My chest feels tight. The mind is rushing. And suddenly there's space. You're no longer trapped in the story. You're watching it unfold. That awareness itself creates peace. The observer is timeless because it doesn't cling to identity or events. When you live from the observer, the past loses its power to define you, and the future loses its power to scare you. You start to experience life as it is, moment by moment, without the constant commentary of the old self. This is liberation, realizing that you are not the storm, but the sky it passes through. And when you live from that sky-like awareness, nothing, not fear, not failure, not loss, can truly shake you. Understanding the idea of killing the old self is powerful, but living it requires action. Transformation isn't just a concept, it's something you practice, embody, and ritualize. That's why rituals of death and rebirth can be so impactful. They give your mind and spirit a way to mark the shift from the old identity into the new. One simple but profound ritual is writing a letter to the old self. Be brutally honest. Write down the habits, beliefs, and roles that no longer serve you. I release the need to always please people. I release the story that I am unworthy. I release the fear of failure. When you finish, burn the letter or tear it into pieces. The act itself becomes a symbolic death, a farewell to the version of you that no longer has power. Another practice is cleansing your environment. The old self often lingers in objects, clothes, or even spaces that hold its energy. Clearing out what represents who you are makes room for who you're becoming. It could be as simple as deleting old messages that tie you to the past or rearranging your room to reflect a fresh start. Rebirth also thrives in small daily practices. Morning silence is one of the most effective. Taking 5 minutes after waking up to breathe, set an intention, or simply notice the observer within. That daily reset signals to your mind, I no longer operate from the old script. I begin again today. You can also anchor rebirth through physical rituals. Some people cut their hair as a sign of shedding the past. Others create a rebirth playlist and use music to set the energy of their new identity. The point isn't what the ritual looks like, it's that it carries meaning for you. Finally, practice micro-deaths throughout your day. A micro-death is the moment you choose to let something go instead of clinging. When you feel the urge to argue but decide to stay silent, that's a death of the old reactive self. When you stop replaying an old insult in your mind, that's a death of the wounded self. Each micro-death makes room for micro-rebirths, patience, peace, and freedom. The old self doesn't vanish in one dramatic moment. It fades through consistent symbolic deaths and intentional rebirths. These rituals remind you that transformation isn't abstract. It's practical, tangible, and available right now. With every choice, you prove to yourself, the old me no longer runs the show. If there's one thing the old self hates, it's change. And the way it fights change is through resistance. Resistance shows up as procrastination, denial, defensiveness, or even outright rebellion. I don't need to change. It's not that bad. I'll do it later. At first, resistance feels like self-protection, but the truth is, resistance doesn't save you from pain, it multiplies it. Think about a river. When you try to fight the current, you tire yourself out, you panic, and eventually you get dragged under. But if you let yourself float, the current carries you forward with less struggle. Life works the same way. When you resist what's already unfolding, a breakup, a loss, a transition, you don't stop it from happening. You just make the experience heavier. Here's an example. Someone resists leaving a toxic relationship because they fear loneliness. In resisting, they endure years of suffering that far outweigh the temporary discomfort of walking away. Another person resists acknowledging their unhealthy habits. Instead of facing the discomfort of change, they accumulate long-term consequences, stress, burnout, illness. Resistance stretches pain into a prolonged cycle, while acceptance shortens it. It's important to clarify, acceptance is not the same as passivity. Acceptance doesn't mean saying, "This is fine, I'll do nothing." It means acknowledging reality without adding layers of denial, blame, or bitterness. When you accept, you take away resistance's power to magnify pain. You can still act, but you act from clarity instead of fear. The observer makes this easier. It notices resistance in real time, the tightening in your chest when you hear uncomfortable feedback, the urge to argue when faced with truth, the excuses you make to delay change. By simply observing these reactions, you create space. That space allows you to ask, what am I resisting, and is the resistance serving me? Often, you'll realize the thing you've been resisting isn't as scary as you imagined. Growth usually feels uncomfortable at first, like stretching a muscle that's been tight for years. But when you stop resisting, the discomfort fades faster and the growth feels natural. The old self believes resistance equals safety. The observer knows resistance equals suffering. Every time you let go of resistance, you step closer to freedom. You stop clinging to the broken cycle and allow yourself to move into new possibilities. In that surrender, the pain lessens, and the path forward becomes clear. It's one thing to understand the idea of the observer, but the real transformation happens when you start living from it every day. Awakening the witness doesn't require sitting on a mountain or meditating for hours. It begins in the ordinary moments, brushing your teeth, walking down the street, answering a text. The observer is always present, but you have to train yourself to notice it. A simple practice is to watch your thoughts as if they were clouds drifting across the sky. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," try saying, "I notice anxious thoughts are passing through." This tiny shift creates distance between you and the emotion. Suddenly, anxiety is no longer your identity. It's just something your mind is experiencing in the moment. That distance is where freedom begins. You can also awaken the witness through mindful pauses. For example, before reacting in a heated conversation, take a breath and silently observe. My body feels tense, my mind wants to argue. In that pause, you gain the power to respond instead of react. Over time, these pauses become second nature, and you realize you don't have to be pulled into every storm your ego creates. Everyday activities are opportunities to practice awareness. When you eat, notice the taste, texture, and how your body responds. When you walk, feel your steps hitting the ground and the air moving against your skin. When you shower, notice the water on your body instead of letting your mind spiral into worries. These small acts turn routine moments into training for awakening. Another powerful tool is journaling from the observer's perspective. Instead of writing, "I am so stressed," you write, Stress is present, but I am noticing it. This not only helps you process emotions, but it rewires your brain to see yourself as awareness, not the emotion itself. The beauty of living as the witness is that it dissolves attachment. You stop clinging to every high and fearing every low. You recognize that joy, sadness, anger, and excitement are all passing visitors, valuable but temporary. And in that recognition, you find stability. Awakening the witness in daily life doesn't make you detached from living. On the contrary, it makes you more alive. You taste food more fully, listen more deeply, and love more openly because you're no longer lost in the endless noise of the old self. You're present, you're awake. And presence, more than anything, is where freedom begins. Most people move through life wearing a persona, a carefully constructed character designed to win approval, avoid rejection, and fit into expectations. The persona says, "This is who I am, the professional, the joker, the strong one, the rebel." It isn't fake, it's just incomplete. The problem comes when we forget it's a mask and mistake it for our true self. Living through a persona is exhausting. You find yourself constantly adjusting based on who's in the room. Around family, you play one role, at work, another, with friends, yet another. Each version requires energy because you're always performing. And deep down, you fear that if the mask slips, people won't accept the real you. Presence, on the other hand, is effortless. Presence isn't about who you appear to be, it's about being fully engaged with the moment as you are. When you live through presence, you're not preoccupied with how you look or what others think. You're listening, responding, and existing without the weight of performance. It's the difference between rehearsing lines in a play versus having a genuine conversation. Here's a simple example. Imagine meeting someone new. The persona kicks in. What impression am I making? Do I sound interesting? You're half in the conversation, half in your own head. But if you drop the persona and choose presence, you simply listen, share honestly, and connect. Ironically, that's when you're most magnetic, not when you're trying to impress, but when you're simply present. Living through presence also frees you from the fear of failure. Personas crave validation and hate mistakes. Presence sees mistakes as part of the moment and moves on. This shift is powerful. Instead of protecting an image, you're actually living your life. One way to practice this is by catching yourself mid-performance. Ask, am I trying to be seen a certain way, or am I simply being? That small question helps you step back into presence. You'll notice conversations become lighter, decisions feel clearer, and your energy feels freer when you're not carrying the weight of persona. The observer thrives in presence because it doesn't need labels or roles. It just exists. And when you live from that state, authenticity shines through. People are drawn to you not because of your mask, but because they feel your realness. Presence, unlike persona, doesn't fade or crack under pressure. It's stable, grounded, and honest. And when you choose presence over persona, you stop performing life and start truly living it. When the old self finally dies, something extraordinary happens. The cycle ends. The endless loop of repeating patterns, clinging to pain, resisting change, and living through masks begins to dissolve. What's left is a clarity so simple it almost feels unreal. You realize you were never trapped to begin with. The prison was made of stories, and the observer has been free all along. Final liberation doesn't mean you'll never face challenges again. Life will still bring ups and downs, losses and gains, but the difference is you're no longer enslaved by them. Where the old self would collapse under rejection, the liberated self observes and learns. Where the old self would cling desperately to control, the liberated self surrenders with grace. You stop being tossed around by life's storms because you've discovered you are the sky, not the weather. This shift feels like stepping off a spinning wheel. Imagine running in circles for years, exhausted and dizzy, believing there was no exit. Then suddenly, you realize the door was open the whole time. Liberation is that moment when you stop running and simply walk out. The cycle of fear, of self-sabotage, of masks and labels no longer defines you. Living in this freedom changes everything. You connect with others authentically without playing roles. You pursue dreams not out of desperation, but out of joy. You forgive more easily because you no longer identify with the wounds of the past. Even failure feels different. It becomes a stepping stone instead of a life sentence. And the beauty of this liberation is that it doesn't arrive from outside. No one else can hand it to you. It emerges the moment you decide to let the old self die and trust the observer within to guide you. Liberation is not a gift you wait for, it's a choice you make over and over until it becomes your natural way of being. In the end, the message is simple. You don't have to keep repeating the cycle. The hidden observer has always been with you, waiting for you to notice. And when you live from that place of awareness, the cycle ends forever. What's left is freedom, raw, authentic, unshakable freedom. And that truly is the life you were always meant to live.